The price of pretending, a brother's karma and the lies that bind. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, questioning everything I've ever known about my family. I always thought I knew who Emily was. She was my little sister, the one who shared my dreams and our childhood struggles. We grew up with modest means, sure, but we had each other. We used to sit on our tiny back porch, sharing a bag of chips, talking about what the future might hold. There was no shame in it, it was just us and the world felt like it could be ours. But that was before Emily met Hunter. Hunter wasn't like the guys she had dated in the past. No, Hunter was from old money, real old money. The kind of wealth where your family's name is etched into history, where you don't just live in a mansion, you own estates, entire blocks of the city, and generations of portraits that stare down from every room. Emily couldn't help but be swept away by it all. And who could blame her? I watched her transform, step by step, into someone I barely recognized. She used to be so proud of where we came from. The nights we spent dreaming about our futures, the days we hustled through life together, those moments shaped us. But now, as I watched her slipping deeper into a world where money and status ruled everything, I felt a distance growing between us, a gap so wide that I could barely see her anymore. Then, one day, out of nowhere, she called me. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice soft but with an edge of something I couldn't place. I agreed, unsure of what she wanted, but knowing something wasn't quite right. When we met at the cafe, she seemed different. Fidgeting with her cup, avoiding eye contact, as if she couldn't bear to look at me. I could tell she had something on her mind, something big. Finally, she spoke, and when the words came out, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I need you to work at my wedding," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, I thought she meant that she wanted my venue services or something simple like that. But no. She wasn't asking for my help with the event. She wanted me to pretend to be part of the service staff. To blend in, to disappear into the background. She needed me to serve drinks and stay invisible. I stared at her, processing what she had just said. It didn't make sense. This was my sister, the same person who once defended me against anyone who made fun of my old shoes, and now she wanted me to pretend like I wasn't her brother. Her explanation came in a rush, her words stumbling over each other. "Hunter's family, they have expectations," she said, her eyes darting nervously. "I've told them things about our family that aren't exactly true. I didn't want them to know, well, about us. About you." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to digest what she was telling me. She had been lying to her new family, lying about everything. Our parents, our background, our lives. In her version of our story, they were art dealers who traveled the world. In reality, our dad worked at a hardware store and mom cleaned houses. The life she had been living for the past few years, the life she had presented to Hunter's family, wasn't real. And now she needed me to hide who I was, to pretend that I was just another nameless server, all to protect her manufactured narrative. My mind raced. My sister, the same person who had once been my partner in everything, was now asking me to become invisible for a day just to keep up with the charade she had created. The emotional betrayal hit me hard. I could barely speak. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how wrong this was. But I didn't. I sat there, paralyzed, torn between the loyalty I had always felt for her and the person I knew I had become. Was I really just supposed to vanish from her life because she didn't want to be associated with me? I thought about it for a long time after that meeting. Her desperate face haunted me. What had happened to the sister I grew up with? And how had things gotten so bad, so quickly? I still don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was because, deep down, I loved her. Maybe I thought I could help her somehow, even if it meant sacrificing a little part of myself. But in that moment, when I agreed, something inside me cracked. I was no longer just her brother. I was now a secret to hide. The days that followed that conversation with Emily felt like I was living in some kind of limbo, caught between guilt and anger, love and betrayal. I couldn't shake the thought of what she'd asked me to do. The request gnawed at me like a thorn lodged deep in my chest, twisting every time I tried to think of something else. I wasn't just a brother anymore. I was a pawn in a game I didn't want to play. Sarah, my wife, was furious when I told her. I'll never forget the look on her face, like I had just handed her a knife and asked her to stab me. "You can't seriously be thinking about doing this," she said, her voice shaking. This is messed up, Alex. She's asking you to pretend like you don't exist." Her words stung, but I couldn't deny them. I knew she was right, but the weight of family loyalty was suffocating. "She's my sister, Sarah. She's asking for help," I tried to explain, my voice faltering. "I have to be there for her, don't I? You think this is helping her?" Sarah shot back. "By erasing who you are? By playing along with her lies?" I couldn't answer. I just sat there, staring at my hands, feeling like I was losing myself in the process. Even our cousin Mia didn't understand. You can't let her do this to you, Alex. You're a successful businessman. You've built something real. This isn't just about your sister's wedding, it's about the life she's trying to create at your expense, Mia said, her voice heavy with concern. You need to stand up for yourself. But how could I? Emily was still my sister. I couldn't bring myself to say no. I felt like if I did, I'd be abandoning her when she needed me most. So, after days of back and forth in my mind, I made the decision. I told Sarah I was going to do it. And though she didn't say anything else, I could see the hurt in her eyes. She didn't understand, and part of me didn't either. But that day, I drove to the wedding venue, a mask of indifference covering the storm raging inside me. The day of the wedding arrived, and as I slipped into the staff uniform, I couldn't recognize the man staring back at me in the mirror. I had traded my suit for a white shirt and black pants, just another invisible face in the crowd. The whole time, my thoughts kept racing back to that moment with Emily, her desperate plea, her fabricated version of our family. And as I looked at the other servers buzzing around me, all I could think about was how I had willingly chosen to become a part of her lie. I watched Emily walk down the aisle to Hunter, her smile radiant, her gown like something out of a fairy tale. There she was, the woman who had once shared everything with me, now a stranger in a world I would never be a part of. The woman who had asked me to hide away in the shadows of her perfect life. As the ceremony unfolded, I did my job. I served drinks, moved trays, and made myself as invisible as possible. Every time I saw Emily, she barely glanced in my direction. Her eyes were locked on Hunter, on the life she was marrying into. Not once did she acknowledge me, the brother who had always been there for her, who had sacrificed a piece of himself for her dreams. But the worst part wasn't the isolation. It was the sense of loss, the feeling that something between us was broken beyond repair. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left me questioning everything about my sister and our family, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Have you ever had to make a decision that went against your better judgment just to keep the peace? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you've ever been in a situation where family loyalty tested your limits, hit that like button because trust me, this story is just getting started. Months passed and the world I once knew seemed to unravel for Emily. Her marriage to Hunter, the man she had once thought would secure her place among the wealthy elite, fell apart faster than anyone could have anticipated. And just like that, Emily was left with nothing, no husband, no fortune, and a reputation that couldn't be repaired. I had heard about her situation through the grapevine, her financial collapse, the bills piling up, and the friends she once flaunted now turning their backs. She had come crashing down from the high pedestal she had built, and what was left was a version of Emily I barely recognized. The woman who had once asked me to disappear for her wedding was now the one trying to find a way back to reality. And, as fate would have it, I found myself in a position where I could offer her a lifeline. I had built my business from the ground up, running a successful venue that was now known for hosting high-profile events. It was one of those events that I hired Emily for, a staff position, of course. No special treatment. She came in looking like a shadow of the person she had once been, her designer clothes replaced by a staff uniform, her face drawn with the weight of her choices. It was awkward, to say the least. Emily, once so proud and full of ambition, was now just another member of the team, carrying trays and refilling glasses. She didn't make eye contact with me when I passed by, and I didn't try to strike up a conversation. There was an unspoken understanding between us. We had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. I watched her as she worked, serving drinks and mingling with guests in the same way I had once done in my early days. It felt almost surreal, as if the universe had decided to serve up its own brand of justice. But despite my own satisfaction, there was a gnawing feeling deep in my chest. Was I enjoying this too much? Was I taking pleasure in her suffering? The truth was, I didn't have the answers. I just knew that Emily needed to be humbled, needed to see the consequences of the life she had built on lies. But as I saw her try to make her way through the event, I couldn't shake the image of the sister who had once shared everything with me, now reduced to this. Then came the news that Hunter was remarrying. Emily found out just like everyone else, and I could see the panic in her eyes when she heard the details. But what happened next took me by surprise. Without even thinking, I scheduled her to work at my venue on the day of Hunter's wedding. I couldn't help it. There was something almost poetic about the idea of Emily, still in her staff uniform, serving drinks at the wedding of the man who had once been her world. The idea of her being so close, yet so far from the life she had once dreamt of, felt like a twist of fate that was impossible to ignore. I didn't tell her about the schedule at first. But when she saw the shift posted, she froze. Her face went pale, and for a split second, I saw the panic that I had been secretly waiting for. Was this revenge? Or was it just the natural consequence of her own actions? I couldn't decide. Maybe a little of both. But what struck me the most was how much things had shifted between us. Emily, who had once been untouchable, was now serving drinks at the very place where she had once envisioned herself as a guest of honor. It was a stark reminder of how far the mighty had fallen. As the day of Hunter's wedding drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that karma was unfolding right before my eyes. Emily had spent so long trying to fit into a world that wasn't her own that she had lost sight of everything that truly mattered. And now she was paying the price for it. But the satisfaction I felt was complicated. There was a part of me that wanted to see her experience the humiliation I had gone through, the years of watching her chase a dream that was never hers. But there was also a small part of me that wondered if I was becoming the kind of person I never wanted to be, the one who takes pleasure in someone else's fall. As the date approached, I couldn't help but think about the next chapter in this strange saga. Would Emily finally realize the truth? Or would she continue down this path of pretension and lies? Whatever happened, I knew one thing for sure: I had given her a chance to change. The question was, would she take it? The day of Hunter's wedding finally arrived, and Emily was there, still working at the venue. She was a different person now, quiet, reserved, and focused. She carried herself with a professionalism that I hadn't seen before, and though there was an undeniable tension between us, I couldn't help but notice how she had changed. Gone was the bravado that had once defined her, replaced by a quiet determination to just get through the day. As the ceremony went on, I watched her serve drinks, moving gracefully between tables, doing her job without complaint. She kept her head down, eyes trained on the task at hand, and I could see that she was trying to blend in. But as the reception began and the guests mingled, things took an unexpected turn. Hunter's mother, who had been scanning the crowd for familiar faces, locked eyes with Emily. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Emily froze too, her gaze meeting the older woman's, both of them caught in an unspoken acknowledgement. I could see the recognition in Hunter's mother's eyes, and for a second I thought the entire charade might come crashing down. But instead of the harsh confrontation I had been dreading, something surprising happened. Claire, Hunter's new bride, approached Emily as she passed by. "You're doing a wonderful job," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "The service here has been amazing." It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple compliment, but for Emily it might as well have been a lifeline thrown into the deep end. The kindness in Claire's words made Emily pause, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, a realization that she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, Emily seemed to question everything she had built. She had spent so much of her life trying to fit into a world that didn't truly care about her, chasing after status and wealth as if they could fill the emptiness inside her. But as Claire smiled and walked away, Emily stood there, frozen, her hands slightly trembling. The life she had been trying to create, built on lies, pretensions, and a constant need to be someone she wasn't, suddenly didn't seem as important anymore. She had been running after something that had no real substance, and all the while, she had lost the very things that could have brought her true happiness, genuine connections and family. That night, after the event ended and the last guests had left, Emily found me in the quiet corner of the venue. She stood there for a long time, just watching me, as if she were waiting for the right words. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "I've been so caught up in the wrong things," she admitted, her eyes not meeting mine. "I've spent so many years trying to impress people who don't even care about me, trying to be someone I thought I had to be. I thought money and status would fill the void, but all it did was make me feel more alone. I didn't know what to say at first. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I could forgive her just yet. But I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the same eyes that had once been full of ambition, now filled with regret. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for what I did. For asking you to hide who you are. For making you feel like you weren't good enough. I don't know how I let it get this far. But I know now that I've lost so much along the way, things that actually matter." I swallowed hard, my emotions rising to the surface. This wasn't the sister I had once known, and yet, in this moment, I saw a version of her I hadn't expected to see again. She was admitting her mistakes. She was acknowledging that the world she had tried so hard to be a part of wasn't worth losing herself over. I took a deep breath, finally breaking the silence. "I've been angry with you for a long time, Emily," I said, my voice steady but my heart heavy. "Angry for what you did. Angry for what you asked me to do. But I understand now. I understand that you were just trying to fit in. We all make mistakes. The important thing is, you're realizing them. That's the first step." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to try. I want to try to be better. To be the person I should have been all along." And just like that, in the quiet of the venue, surrounded by the remnants of the day, we shared a moment of raw honesty. The years of tension, of unspoken resentment seemed to melt away, replaced by a fragile but real connection. Emily wasn't the same person she had been, and neither was I. We had both learned something today, something that couldn't be bought or faked. Emily's transformation wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but it had begun. She was starting to see that superficial success doesn't bring happiness, and that the things that really matter, family, humility, and authenticity, can't be found in the world she had been chasing. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important lesson of all. Months passed, and in that time, Emily began to rebuild her life. One painstaking step at a time. It wasn't easy. She had to prove herself all over again. But this time, she wasn't just trying to impress anyone. She was focused on doing the work for its own sake. At Alex's venue, she took on shifts without complaint, learning the ins and outs of every role, from greeting guests to handling logistics. The initial awkwardness between us slowly faded, and I began to see the determination in her eyes that had been buried under the weight of her past mistakes. She worked hard, gaining respect from her colleagues, and, though there were moments when I could still feel the tension between us, I saw her growth. It wasn't just about doing the job. It was about understanding what it meant to earn respect, not just through accomplishments, but through honesty and humility. There was something different about Emily now, a quiet strength that had replaced the desperation that once defined her. And then, after months of hard work, I offered her a chance to prove herself further. "You've earned it, I said one afternoon, as we sat in my office going over event schedules. "I want to give you more responsibility. You've shown me you're ready for it." Her eyes widened, a mix of surprise and gratitude crossing her face. It felt right, like we were finally moving past the hurt, past the walls we had built up between us. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. A few weeks later, I received an email that made my stomach drop. It was from Henry, Emily's ex-husband. He had booked our venue for his wedding. His new wedding to a woman Emily had never met, but whose name she knew all too well. Emily was immediately scheduled to work on the day of his wedding, still part of the team, but now in a completely different capacity. No longer the hired help, but a fully qualified staff member. The thought of her serving drinks at Henry's wedding, still wearing the uniform, was almost too poetic to ignore. I knew what she must have been feeling. A part of me wondered if I should have said something, if I should have offered her an escape from the day altogether. But I didn't. I wanted Emily to stand on her own 2 feet, to be the woman she was becoming, someone who could face the past without running from it. The day of Henry's wedding arrived, and it was as if everything had come full circle. Emily walked into the venue, a calm composure about her, her uniform crisp and professional. She didn't flinch when Henry walked past her, his eyes glancing at her for a brief moment before he turned away. She didn't flinch when his new bride came over to thank the staff for the service. Emily simply smiled, nodding with grace, and carried on with her work. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride watching her. This wasn't just about the job. This was about Emily finally owning her story, owning who she was, and showing up without fear of judgment. For the first time in a long time, I saw her at peace with herself. The wedding ended, the last guests had left, and the venue was quiet again. As we sat together, collecting our thoughts after the event, Emily came up to me. She looked different than when I had first hired her. Stronger, more centered, as if she had shed the last remnants of the person who had chased after a life of pretense. "I know I've said this before, but—" She paused, her voice steady. "Thank you for everything, for giving me a chance to rebuild, for not giving up on me when I didn't deserve it. I've learned so much about myself, about what really matters. And I just want you to know that I'm not the same person I was." I nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I think you're finally becoming the person you always were, I said quietly. "The person I knew was inside you all along." And in that moment, with the weight of everything that had happened between us lifting, we found the peace we had been searching for. The storm we had weathered was finally behind us. And as we stood there, side by side, I realized that our relationship had come full circle. The walls had crumbled, and what was left was the truth. about family, about forgiveness, and about the healing that only comes when we let go of the things that hold us back. Emily wasn't the same person she had been when she asked me to hide my true self at her wedding. And I wasn't the same person who had agreed to it. We had both grown, both found our way back to who we were meant to be. And as we walked out of the venue that night, I knew we had done the hardest thing of all. We had forgiven ourselves and each other.